war ended in 1945. And within months, the United States government had quietly moved 1,600 Nazi scientists off German soil, given them new names, new addresses, and new paychecks. Some of them had run concentration camp experiments on living prisoners, and the agency that recruited them knew exactly who they were before they signed the paperwork. In the final months of World War II, American intelligence officers fanned out across defeated Germany with a specific mission that had nothing to do with justice and nothing to do with accountability. They were looking for scientists, not just any scientists, the engineers, physicists, chemists, and rocket specialists who had built the most advanced weapons program in human history for Adolf Hitler's government. The program they were running had a name. It was called Operation Paperclip. And what it produced over the following 2 decades quietly reshaped American military power, American space exploration, and American intelligence infrastructure in ways that the government would not fully acknowledge for another 50 years. The selection process was not random. American officers worked from lists compiled by military intelligence units that had spent years tracking German scientific output through intercepted communications, captured documents, and informant networks embedded inside the German scientific community. By the time the war ended, they knew exactly who had built what. They knew which scientists had developed the rocket systems that rained destruction on London. They knew which researchers had overseen pressurized chamber experiments that killed prisoners at Dachau concentration camp to test the limits of human endurance at high altitude. They knew which chemists had worked on nerve agent programs that the German military never deployed but had developed to a level of sophistication that American researchers had not approached. They recruited them anyway. In some cases, they recruited them first and asked questions later. In other cases, they did not ask questions at all. Wernher von Braun was the most visible example. By 1945, von Braun was 33 years old and had already overseen the development of the Aggregate 4 rocket, the weapon the British called the V2, that had killed an estimated 9,000 civilians in London, Antwerp, and other Allied cities during the final year of the war. He had also been a member of the Nazi Party since 1937 and a commissioned officer in the Schutzstaffel, the organization responsible for running the concentration camp system. The rockets von Braun designed were built using forced labor from the Mittelwerk underground factory, where historians estimate that 20,000 prisoners died from exhaustion, starvation, and execution during the production period. Von Braun knew the conditions at Mittelwerk. He visited the facility. He selected workers from the prisoner population for specialized tasks. When American intelligence officers found him in Bavaria in May of 1945, they offered him a contract. He accepted. Within a decade, he was working for the United States Army at Redstone Arsenal in Alabama. Within 2 decades, he was directing the Saturn rocket program that put American astronauts on the surface of the moon. The official biography released during the Apollo program described him as a visionary. It did not mention the Schutzstaffel. It did not mention Mittelwerk. It did not mention the 20,000 dead. The mechanism that made Operation Paperclip possible was not complicated. It was paperwork. American military and intelligence officers submitted security clearance applications for their recruited scientists through standard channels. The Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, the office overseeing the program, instructed its officers to sanitize the personnel files before submission. Records of Nazi Party membership were altered or removed. Records of Schutzstaffel affiliation were reclassified or buried in separate files that reviewers would not routinely access. Records of involvement in weapons programs that had used concentration camp labor were reframed as general wartime industrial work. The State Department and the Federal Bureau of Investigation both raised objections at various points in the process. J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, wrote directly to the State Department in 1947, expressing concern that the program was importing individuals whose wartime records represented a security risk. His objection was overruled by the Joint Chiefs of Staff on the grounds that the scientific value of the recruits outweighed the security concerns. That correspondence exists in the declassified record. What the sanitized files obscured was not limited to party membership. At least 16 scientists recruited under Operation Paperclip had documented connections to medical experiments conducted on concentration camp prisoners without consent. Hubertus Strughold, who became known after the war as the father of American space medicine, and whose name was placed on a prestigious aerospace medical award that was not renamed until 2013, had attended a 1942 conference in which the results of the high-altitude freezing experiments conducted on Dachau prisoners were presented and discussed. The experiments involved submerging prisoners in ice water to measure how long the human body could survive in freezing temperatures. Strughold's post-war personnel file described him as a researcher with no involvement in human experimentation. On the 1942 conference attendance record was in a separate archive that reviewers did not cross-reference. He arrived in the United States in 1947 and spent the following decades building the medical protocols that governed American spaceflight. The classification status of Operation Paperclip was not fully lifted until 1973, nearly 3 decades after the program began. The internal documents that revealed the full scope of the file sanitization process. The specific instructions given to officers about how to alter personnel records, the internal memos acknowledging that recruits had wartime records that would have disqualified them under existing immigration law, the correspondence between the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency and Military Command about how to handle objections from the State Department and the Federal Bureau of Investigation did not become available to researchers until the 1980s and 1990s, when a series of Freedom of Information Act requests forced their declassification. The historian Annie Jacobson published the most comprehensive account of the program in 2014, drawing on documents that had been withheld from public access for between 40 and 60 years after the events they described. The program ran from 1945 until 1959. In that period, the United States government brought approximately 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technical specialists into the country under its provisions. They worked at military installations, government research facilities, and universities across the country. Some of their work produced technologies that became foundational to American military and space programs. Some of their work produced nothing of lasting value. All of it was done under identities and personnel files that had been deliberately altered to remove the portions of their histories that the government had decided the public did not need to know. The scientists recruited under Operation Paperclip lived out their careers in American institutions. Most died with their reputations intact. The prisoners who survived the experiments those scientists oversaw, the forced laborers who built the rockets they designed, the families of the 9,000 civilians killed by weapons they engineered. None of them were consulted when the contracts were offered in 1945. None of them were mentioned in the press releases when the rockets launched. The award-bearing Hubertus Strughold's name stood for decades in the lobby of an American aerospace institution before anyone in an official capacity acknowledged what his wartime record actually contained. The files that documented what had been altered and why sat in government archives, classified, while the men whose records had been sanitized collected American government salaries, received American honors, and in at least one case helped put human beings on the surface of the moon. The full picture did not emerge in a congressional hearing. It did not emerge in a presidential statement. It emerged because researchers filed Freedom of Information Act requests and waited years for responses. That is how this story came out, and not because someone decided the public deserved to know, because someone decided to keep asking. The documents cited in this video are publicly available. The declassified Operation Paperclip files are held at the National Archives and Records Administration in College Park, Maryland. Annie Jacobson's full account is published under the title Operation Paperclip and is available through major libraries and booksellers. The Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency internal memos are in the declassified record. The Federal Bureau of Investigation correspondence objecting to the program is in the declassified record. The 1942 conference attendance documents are in the archived record of the Nuremberg medical trial proceedings. Everything in this video was recorded at the time it happened. The question was never whether the records existed. The question was always who was looking at them and who was deciding what to do with what they found. If you are the kind of person who keeps looking, this channel is for you. Subscribe, because we are not done.